Many players know Lucy as a reliable support with a powerful attack buff. I myself believed this until I decided to look a little deeper into her potential. And after much investigation, I've come to the realization that Lucy might not be a very strong support at all. Hello, I'm Luciana de Moneyfio, and today I hope to guide you on a journey of enlightenment and intrigue as we look into the heart of Lucy's skills and how to make the most of what she can really do. There are seemingly 3 ways to build Lucy. Out of consideration for the viewers who simply want a quick guide and to move along without worrying about the details of the character, here is the Diet Support build, or basically a buff bot. In this build, you need only get Core C and to level the EX as much as you can, preferably to 9 or 11, as a higher EX makes the buff easier to max out. The W engines available are represented on this tier list to help guide your decision making in this respect. In terms of disk drives, 4-piece jazz always and any filler is acceptable. There are some recommendations, but none are really necessary. For the main stats, ER percent on DD6 is a necessity. For DD4 and 5, attack percent will be ideal. How much attack percent you may need will vary depending on your level and that of your W engine, but here's a table for how much attack you will need at each level, and a conversion for attack percent rolls at level 60 or 50 with a few different W engines. The next build is one that is infamous amongst many supports, that being an on-field DPS. As I'm sure is evident, this is definitely by far the least effective way to use the character, but I'm sure some individuals may find it entertaining. Please note that while this is effectively a joke build, in my opinion it is actually quite useful to highlight the comparative strength of the third build. Despite being but a humble jest, its conception actually reveals a large ignorance of her natural strengths. I personally happen to believe in using your favorite characters no matter how good they are, but I would rather they reach their fullest potential than pay any cost just to give them a poor spotlight. The important stats for DPS Lucy are of course crits and attack percent, with DD5 being fire damage and DD6 being attack or ER. The W engine remains the same as the previous build, and the set bonuses of choice are 4-piece woodpecker and 2-piece punk or filler. With that out of the way, welcome viewers to a real dive into how Lucy works, why she's actually weak, and why she's actually good. The first thing to understand about Lucy is the truth behind her buffs. Her EX costs 60 energy, and it applies a combat attack buff of up to 600 for 10 seconds to the team. If you hold it down, you can use Fly Ball, which is basically just a 5% stronger, twice as slow version that buffs for 15 seconds. While it sounds strong on paper, compared to other supports, it's actually pretty insignificant. Currently, there is only one other attack buffer in the game in Sokaku, but more are sure to come, and the standard is sure to get higher and higher. Sokaku, on the other hand, can at any time she wishes put down her flag and gain a 22 to 30 second buff of 500 attack. Or if she spends energy to build Vortex, 1000 attack and 20% ice damage bonus. As is evident, 1000 is bigger than 600 and 22 to 30 is twice as long as 10 to 15. Already, we are off to a rocky start. Even with the maximum possible energy gain off-field, Lucy can barely not maintain uptime with Fly Ball. Even if she could, Fly Ball takes over 2 seconds to trigger a quick assist, which is detrimental for such a short duration buff, and it definitely hurts triggers like Starlight Engine or Nekomata's Core. To be honest, I don't see Fly Ball as generally worth it during combat. While Lucy is invulnerable during the entire windup of her EX, using invulnerability to dodge attacks can be considered a damage loss, as you could have dodge countered or parried for a net gain. Either way, Lucy has nowhere near the ability necessary to maintain buff uptime, even if her buff is larger than Sokaku's free buff. Now, you may be thinking, aren't you forgetting something? Lucy's buff applies to the whole team. It's actually a total of 1800 attack. I hear you, and that's true. However, currently, most of the teams being used rely on a hyper carry, or main character, who holds the vast majority of the team's damage on their back. In cases like this, the other 1200 attack doesn't really see use, as the skills and stats of the other characters aren't prepared to convert that attack into damage nearly as well. Effectively, it's just the 600 on the hyper carry, which is nice, but with such poor uptime, it's nothing special. Even outside of ice teams, it may just be better at this point to just use Sokaku. So, if Lucy's supporting capabilities are lacking, surely they must be made up for in her damage potential. Well, Lucy does have a rather unique mechanic. Once she calls for them, generally by using a skill, Grassy, Woody, and Bricky, her 3 little boars, come onto the field and stick around to harass the enemies with small physical attacks. Lucy herself has rather lackluster attacks, and only the 4th of her 5 attacks deals fire damage. The one saving grace of this is that after the first completion, she can loop the last 2 hits. To follow with her pitiful attack string, she unfortunately also possesses one of the worst EX damage and the single worst chain attack damage scaling in the game, as well as a gold parry so awful that even with a 4 skill level advantage, it is still worse than the second worst parry in the game. Even her ult and parry counter suffer from terminal mid. The only standout is her dodge counter, which is exceptional, top 5. Quite notable considering Jane Doe is in there twice. Despite this, overall, the only skills worth raising are her normal attack and EX. To top it all off, Lucy has the second lowest impact in the game right now, so she doesn't inflict much daze either. With the understanding that her moves are rather weak, I wish to bring your attention to a silly little quirk that turns this all upside down. Whenever Lucy applies her attack buff to the team, her boars are inspired to do their signature boar jutsu, Spinning Swing. This move at level 11 deals 478% damage. For reference, her abysmal EX deals 971%. While at first glance this is a helpful increase, a key aspect of this is that there are 3 boars, and each boar gets to spin. This means that while her humble EX only deals 971%, it causes the 3 boars to spin, resulting in a bonus of over 1400%, a grand 147% damage bonus. The conundrum with this ability is that the boars do physical damage as opposed to Lucy's own fire damage. Interestingly, the physical damage of the boars will actually eclipse the fire damage she herself deals. But before you go thinking about putting Fizz bonus on Lucy, even if a larger portion of her damage is physical, the value of investing in physical or fire damage is just not good. A proper balance could be achieved by instead going for pen ratio, if not for one tragic truth. The boars, humble as can be, do not have access to any stats besides attack and crits. This means damage bonus or pen ratio will not affect their damage. In total, they only have as much attack as Lucy, plus 2 times the cheer on bonus. And they share her crit stats if you have her additional ability active. Considering all this, Lucy is left in a tragic state of affairs. She doesn't want any damage bonuses as they have drastically reduced value or just don't work. Her actual moves aren't very good, her signature attack buff is not very active, and even if it was, the actual impact of it is less than what Sokaku could achieve. In the end, as she is, Lucy is just not a very strong support. Now, what if after all that, Lucy is actually really good and can do a lot of damage without taking any more field time? How does this happen? Well, the answer is simple. More Lucys. Her cinemas are... Her C1 is rather humble, just a 10% energy back on your EX. Her C2, however, while simple, changes everything. Lucy's C2 grants her attack buff whenever she does a chain attack. Why does this matter? It means you now have 2 sources of applying this short buff and ensures that you have it during the most important time, a stun window. Combining her C2 and energy, you can usually keep the buff on very consistently. Another huge boon from this is that by doing a chain attack and getting the buff, the boars will do their jutsu and spin. This means her chain attack becomes just like her EX, gaining a significant damage increase of over 165%. Combining stuns with her EX also allows her to spit out a lot of damage through the board. And by making her chain attacks better, it justifies a chain attack to get the swing jazz buff. Now all of a sudden, she does a lot of damage and has a great buff up top. Unusually, her C3 and C5, which give levels, are actually pretty valuable compared to other supports, as they buff the damage of the spins as well as reducing the threshold to max out her buff. Moving on, Lucy C4 is a mild 10% crit damage added onto her buff, but her C6 takes fixing her problems to the extreme. While the buff is enabled, any ally using their EX will extend the buff by 5 seconds up to 15 per buff, and a boar will firebomb then spin on the target for free damage. So how does this affect our build? Well, 4-piece swing jazz is a must, but I recommend woodpecker 2-piece for the filler sets. If for whatever reason you don't want to, hormone punk is my next pick. The main stats should always be ER on 6 and attack percent on 5, but if you have trouble reaching the buff cap, don't be afraid to use attack on the 4 as well, as a main stat is a huge contribution. Otherwise, I would recommend crit. For the W engine, it's key to note that her SIG, Kaboom the Cannon, provides a 10 to 16% combat attack buff to the entire team, basically at all times. It gives 1 of 4 stacks of a buff for each unique unit who deals damage, with the boars counting for 3 and the current active character being the 4. This is actually a very significant buff, and likely you will get upwards of 400 attack from this, meaning your DPS character will have a total attack buff of over 1000, successfully matching Sokaku's freak. The only other ideal engine currently is Rena's Sig, Weeping Cradle. Weeping Cradle increases damage taken by the enemy for a couple seconds when the equipper hits them. Notably, this does increase the damage of the boars. Unfortunately, the boars are not the equipper and are therefore unable to turn on the buff themselves. Fortunately, Lucy's EX and chain attack take a second to finish, often meaning you have a longer window to utilize the buff after swapping off, such as for chain attacks and ults, especially during stun windows. This can be a very significant damage increase, but only if you're making the most of these windows. While Weeping Cradle is a good alternative in its effect, it does give 20 to 30% less energy regen than Kaboom and the Vault. To make up for this, it has the benefit of some pen ratio for Lucy's attacks and 9% more base attack to make all attack percent more effective. I would recommend Lucy Sig first and foremost, but Weeping Cradle, if used properly, is a strong competitor. Overall, Lucy is a reliable support who can apply a powerful attack buff. With the right understanding of her tools, she can output good damage without taking up any actual field time and is able to maintain a reliable and significant attack buff. Lucy is actually inclined towards teams with a balanced damage contribution as opposed to an unbalanced damage contribution like with a hyper carry. A key thing to remember while playing Lucy is that she's a prime user of swap canceling, where you swap onto her while your current character is in an animation, like a long attack or EX, and use her EX to quick assist back. Furthermore, quick assist attacks are generally really weak in terms of damage output, and if not for the triggering of buffs or repositioning and allowing you to swap into a character that's already on the field, I would skip them. Lastly, as I think it's important to address, I have heard tell of a Daze Lucy build and want to dissuade anyone from falling into this unfortunate path. As I said before, Lucy's impact may be colloquially referred to as dog water. This means impact percent buffs are extra weak. Additionally, her daze multipliers are insubstantial and compared to actual stunners are mostly inconsequential. You lose far too much abandoning the W engine and valuable 60% ER from DD6 just for a minor impact increase. On top of this, I'd like to remind you of her gold parry, which, impact aside, is an entire 35% worse than the average in the game. With this, we have reached the end. I hope the fruits of this journey were not simply the friends made along the way, but a true and comprehensive understanding of an interesting and unique character's features. There's another character I'm hoping to make a video on, who I believe is misunderstood far worse than Lucy, who, despite perhaps not reaching her fullest potential, most players are still able to utilize her well enough to think that she is good. I've been Luciana de Moneyfio, and I wish you good tidings. Thank you for watching.